You, me, and the hundreds of thousands who listen to us have experienced anxiety.
I'd call a panic attack a living death.
This epidemic can turn your life into an ordeal, even when to others it seems like you have everything.
Anxiety is like getting on a train headed for depression, and you decide at which station you get off.
Half of the patients who suffer from long-term anxiety end up depressed.
Anxiety is the illness with 1,000 faces, because if I fight those thoughts, in the end they're just going to get stronger.
And worst of all, medicine only knows how to treat the symptom by giving drugs that sometimes just swap one problem for another.
Each generation is more anxious than the previous one. The biggest mistake anyone can make is to...
Fortunately, there are alternatives. Dr. Alejandro Martinez is a psychiatrist and content creator in the field of mental health.
When anxiety becomes so intense that you're even afraid to leave your own home,
Today, he joins Mejor que Ayer to share the most practical and useful perspective on anxiety you've heard in a while. Welcome to Mejor que Ayer, Dr. Alejandro Martinez. Dr. Alejandro Martinez, welcome to Mejor que Ayer. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here and talk a little about something so important.
Extremely important, very common, as I said in the introduction, right? I think more and more people have anxiety. I myself, on certain days, in certain circumstances, also experience it. I think everyone listening to us goes through this situation at some point in their lives. Today, there's a lot to talk about, and I'm really looking forward to it because I think it's very practical. Let's start by defining anxiety. Most people already have an idea of what anxiety is. What does a psychiatrist say anxiety really is? Explained simply.
Look, anxiety, stress in general, is a natural emotion that we need and that is not good or bad in itself. The problem is when the frantic society we live in, a sick society, pushes us to have levels of stress and anxiety that make it no longer normal. I explained that stress and anxiety are like the string of a guitar. It needs a certain level of tension to sound good. But if you tighten that string too much, it ends up breaking, and that's when patients start coming to my office. And that's a problem. Estrella,
Stress and anxiety are closely linked, correct?
stress and anxiety, yes. Look, to differentiate them, I have an exam, I have to speak in public, I need a certain level of stress. It's super necessary, super useful. It helps me perform better, to be more focused cognitively. But the problem is when that specific task is already over, and yet that great discomfort, that hyper-demanding feeling remains. And that's when we talk about anxiety. That is when that hypervigilance, that mind that doesn't stop, continues over time. In the end, that takes a huge toll on your physical and mental health, which we'll get into now. Yes.
And Alejandro, how would you categorize anxiety? As a symptom or as a disorder?
Anxiety is a symptom signaling that something in our lives needs to change. I use the metaphor of a car's dashboard warning light that alerts you when something isn't working. Your job is to pull over to the side of the road, try to stop as soon as you can, lift the hood, and see what's not working properly. Because sometimes it's just something minor like adjusting the oil, but if you ignore it and keep driving, the breakdown can become much worse and the engine can even seize up. And that's when, as I say, we end up asking for professional help. So it's a symptom like a fever or anything else that tells us something isn't working right. Our job is to listen to it and see what things we need to change.
That's a very good point because sometimes I see people who have normalized having anxiety so much that they don't look for what's wrong with the car, right? It's simply saying, well, I'm anxious, I have anxiety, but it's true that I like to see anxiety as a symptom that something is happening and that you need to pay attention to something, even if it's not in your awareness at that moment, right? But I think it always tells you that something isn't right.
And something that this book has given me and that social media has taught me is that a lot of people tell me, hey, I had anxiety and I hadn't even realized it. You're describing anxiety. I had normalized it, thinking that's just how things were and that's the problem. When we live like headless chickens rushing nonstop and normalizing it as a society, that's when we have a problem. Yes.
Yes. Just the other day, the Uber driver recognized me and started asking me questions. I have some stinging neck pains here and there. What are the pains like? Typical questions doctors ask, right? Well, they don't feel like pressure. They're stinging pains that I get when I work long hours. I'm sitting here, I can't go out, I can't work out, that sort of thing. It's really an epidemic, isn't it? And people, just like you said, right? People don't consider that this discomfort could simply be, well, I don't really like to say it because it's true that sometimes we trivialize anxiety. It could be anxiety and that something needs to be done about it, right? Look, I want to mention something. The other day I heard a therapist online who said something like, I really liked it. She said something like, the discomfort a patient expresses in a session, a therapist can always put it into two categories. The first category, that discomfort is a symptom or a deficiency of something, of a neurotransmitter, a behavioral deficit, an alteration, right? Something pathological. Or second category, that discomfort could be a defense. A defense of that person. And that distinction between lack or deficiency or, let's say, shield, right, or defense splits psychiatry in two. It splits the approaches in two, right? Because, of course, when we cover up that symptom with a drug, which is the most common thing medicine does nowadays with anxiety, right? Well, like you said, it's as if you put a sticker over the warning light in the car, right? And the problem is still there, but you don't see it anymore and you're happy, right? But the car is going to break down at some point.
And I love it. Look, another metaphor I use that's really, really good is that anxiety is like a kitchen alarm detector. It could save my life. It's very necessary and useful. I have one, and if my kitchen catches fire, it'll alert me that something is burning, which is a relief. The problem comes when I don't have this sensor properly calibrated. So at the slightest thing, it goes off. If I make toast, it goes off. If there's steam, it goes off. This can make my life impossible. If I silence this and ignore it, then the kitchen could catch fire, just like you said, and I wouldn't even notice. So it's good not to cover up the symptom, but to listen to it, learn how to handle it, first understand that it's a symptom, and stop to see what it's trying to tell me. In the end, like you said, unfortunately, and this is a topic we can open up, we need to reconsider. Why is it that Spain, depending on the year, because it's true that we have the horrible honor of being the world champion in benzodiazepine prescriptions? It depends on the year, but many times we're number one, which is a shame. They're medications, after all, benzodiazepines, and we shouldn't demonize anything. When used properly, of course, they have their role, but what makes no sense at all is prescribing them indiscriminately. In the end, we can reconsider why this problem occurs. Does it happen because the system is poorly designed? Well, I think so. Because when it comes to doctors, family doctors, as you know well, since we've experienced the system from the inside, or the specialists, 5 minutes per patient, what can doctors do? Like you say, how do you explain to a patient what anxiety is? How do you explain good sleep hygiene so the patient can sleep well? Well, the easiest thing is to prescribe an Orfidal, a lorazepam in 5 minutes and mask the symptom. And there are people who are helped by it for a long time. But we have more and more studies linking benzodiazepines to cognitive decline, to risk of falling. These are drugs that don't come without a cost, which ultimately only affect GABA and not serotonin or other neurotransmitters. Much more important, and in the end, they cause significant dependence. It's that I need higher doses of the medication each time to get the same effect of calming my anxiety, and if one day I don't take it, my body is going to miss it, just like it happens to me with alcohol. So we have to be critical of the model without pointing fingers or blaming anyone, but with common sense, because in the end, this also generates a lot of debate, right? The patients who hear this when I talk about this topic sometimes feel attacked or offended. They say, but in the end, these are medications that require a prescription. What am I supposed to do if I go to my doctor and he prescribes it to me? And to the doctor, we say, hey, let's change it. And the doctor says to you, well, I have a waiting list, a full waiting room. I have 5 minutes per patient. And now you're going to tell me how to do my job, right? So, yes.
Plus, patients who already come in conditioned, well, not even conditioned is the word, they already depend on the medication to sleep, to live, to go to work, to be functional, to take care of their children, their partner. So, of course, once you get into that cycle, it's very hard to get patients out of it. It's very hard for someone used to sleeping with benzodiazepines to stop.
It's tough. And the trap is, Boyka Bandera, they're very effective. Is that they work very well. The trap is that they work very quickly, very well, and without short-term side effects. So suddenly, someone who hasn't slept in a long time takes benzodiazepine once and says, how wonderful.
It's like an immediate relief, right, Alejandro?
Exactly. And besides, we also live in a culture of instant gratification. We want quick, simple solutions, and I live at such a frantic pace that don't ask me to put in much effort because I just don't have it in me. So suddenly they offer me this magical solution without explaining the long-term consequences, and of course I want it.
What percentage of the patients you see for anxiety already come in taking one or more of these types of psychiatric medications?
Many. It's changing because lately, thank God, people are seeking help earlier. They come to the consultation sooner, and maybe not as much time has passed or they've seen fewer doctors, but many colleagues, many doctors prescribe a lot of benzodiazepines.
And in your case, well, what's your approach? Do you try to get the minimum viable dose? Do you try to withdraw it? Does it depend on the case? How does it go?
We start by analyzing the case to identify their problem. Do they have anxiety or other daily life issues besides anxiety? That is, hey, look, what you're telling me, we're going to give you tools to handle it better, but it's not a clinical problem as such, or there's nothing better than not being needed. And then, with my way of understanding medicine, I always explain that when a patient comes to you, nowadays people want to know the why and the purpose of things. That's why this podcast exists. People are willing to listen to an hour-long interview with a psychiatrist because they want deeper knowledge and understanding. So first I tell a person who comes to my office, you are at this point and I make a roadmap for you and we want to reach this point. You have tremendous anxiety or you have mild anxiety and we want to reach that state of calm and well-being, and I am going to explain to the patient all the ways to get to that point so that the patient is the one who chooses. Because that model from the 80s where a doctor, without even looking you in the face, would write on a piece of paper what you had to do and say, here you go. And they wouldn't explain to you the why or what for about things, that's completely outdated now. And the patient wants to say, hey, look, what's happening to me? Tell me about it and how can I get better? And there are times when you can get better from so many things. There are times when you can get better, of course, in the vast majority of cases with psychotherapy, with tools, with relaxation techniques. In 90% of cases, there are others who feel very comfortable with natural tools, with herbal medicine, the power of plants, and we already have very solid evidence of the power of saffron, the power of adaptogens. Hey, they help me manage certain moments in my life with a lot of stress or anxiety, or certain stressful moments when I can't change the fact that my boss is a tyrant who has asked more of me this month than I can handle. Well, sometimes small tools help me manage it, right? Or patients who are doing very badly, well, I do think that in some cases certain medication may be necessary, but medication with an explanation of the pros, the benefits, and the consequences. And there is medication that doesn't cause addiction and truly heals because there are pharmacological tools for sleeping, medications. People say, well, name the medications. We can't just name medications because that would be reckless, right? And in the end, we have to evaluate each case, the contraindications, but there are tools beyond benzodiazepines that, in my opinion, help much more and provide a much better solution.
Well, that's an interesting point. What natural alternatives are there? I know about the world of adaptogens, which are used quite a lot. Ashwagandha, rhodiola, maca, and all the others. That can play a role, right? But it's true that you've mentioned one that's really, for me, new in the world of anxiety and mental health, which is saffron or saffron extract, right? What evidence is there for it in anxiety, for example?
Look, we have a lot of meta-analyses and solid ones with very large sample sizes, with huge numbers of patients that talk about it. But I always say that theory is one thing and your real clinical practice is another. Because what the papers say is one thing, which is great and fundamental, and we should base ourselves on the papers. But then when you adapt it to clinical practice, it's not always like that. But we have meta-analyses that show, and they've been compared with fluoxetine, with a synthetic antidepressant to improve anxiety, and it's been seen that it improves anxiety just as much as a synthetic drug. That's what some meta-analyses say. It's a very important meta-analysis of great quality, but I wish it were like that. Because in clinical practice, when someone is really blocked, it's not that powerful. But for a very large percentage of patients, we know that saffron is able to increase that serotonin, that hormone of happiness and calm, which improves mood, reduces anxiety, and improves sleep. Because I always recommend taking 30 milligrams 1 hour before sleeping with very few side effects. The therapeutic margin is very wide and it's a tool that works very well for many of my patients. And hey, they feel very comfortable taking it. It helps them as a crutch, as a support until they get better, because in the end, medication is never the long-term solution. Nobody wants to depend on a pill, whether it's natural or not. But hey, if I'm in a very dark place and I need a rope to get me out of there, it's okay to use that crutch, that help for a while until I work on things at a psychotherapeutic level. Learn tools for how to manage that anxiety, how to calm myself, diaphragmatic breathing. Hey, you've broken your ankle. Let's fix your ankle so you can walk again. Then, after intense rehab, there will come a point when the crutch becomes a hindrance and we can stop using it.
Of course. And in what percentage of patients does the medication have to be started from the beginning? I imagine it's those who are very serious.
Look, every person is unique, and the risk of disclosure and of writing a book, I open the book like this, or of making a 1-minute reel, which is often hard for me, is adapting that message for each person. Before I recommend anything to any patient, I spend at least half an hour getting to know them, seeing what's going on with them, what they're experiencing, 40 minutes getting to know that person just to be able to make a simple recommendation. Look, what you need is to exercise. Well, it's simple. Something as straightforward as that can dramatically improve a lot of symptoms. But there is a percentage of patients who are very, very complicated with very intense anxiety, with post-traumatic stress disorder, with social phobia, with generalized anxiety disorder, with agoraphobia, which is when the anxiety is so intense that you're even afraid to leave your own home. There, psychotherapy is slow and takes time because we've all had the fantasy of getting in shape in 6 months or even in a month by going to the gym. We realize results come only after much work, just like in psychotherapy. I wish it were so fast that in a month we could get a patient to restructure all their thoughts, their way of reading or understanding the world, but no, it takes time. So there are cases where a well-prescribed medication that isn't a benzodiazepine can change someone's anxiety in an incredible way, where it's suffocating them and then it drops to a level that allows them to continue and live their life. And I see that every day in my practice. People who come in feeling really bad with horrible thoughts, with thoughts like, I can't live like this, and of course medication has its role. In the end, everything is understood. Like using all the tools, being sufficiently trained in psychopharmacology, which I think is fundamental for a psychiatrist, and natural tools that they don't teach you in school or anywhere else, so you have to train yourself. And for me, it has been a beautiful and enormous task to train myself in which natural tools to use to respond to that profile of patients who feel comfortable there. And if not, well, psychotherapy, which is also essential, and you have to make it a fundamental pillar to address any suffering that a patient may bring to the consultation and to shed a little light on that path.
Do you think that in general psychiatrists and psychiatry are well prepared to deal with the problem of anxiety in psychotherapy? I've seen two types of psychiatrists, those who are very focused on psychopharmacology, very into medication and biological approaches, and then those who actually like psychotherapy. But do you really think the level is high, or?
I've had to train myself in psychotherapy with a lot of master's degrees and a lot of training, because it's true that psychopharmacological training is prioritized, which is fundamental and very good. But I do think that maybe that part is missing to understand it better. And in the end, I also feel very sorry about that fierce internal struggle, that we have between psychologists, psychiatrists, the psychiatrists themselves, and anti-psychiatry, because I think we should train ourselves as best as possible to guide the patient. This isn't a fight about who's better or who's worse. I don't see other specialties like among traumatologists, rehabilitation doctors, or physical therapists fighting with each other.
Does that internal struggle exist within the world of mental health?
Yes. And it's a shame, because many times everyone defends their own area, and that's fine, but I think you have to have common sense and a holistic education and know how to use the right tool for each patient. A patient in that situation feels very lost. And if, on top of that, we confuse them even more with debates that we should have among ourselves as part of critical thinking, but we end up confusing them more, it's possible that they won't ask for help. When you're stuck, you just need someone to help you.
Yes, I can think of a lot of questions. From the patient side, we've already said that medicine is very focused on psychopharmaceuticals, but what about from the patient side? I understand that when a patient is struggling and you say, no, Manolo, what will really help you the most is if you start working out in the afternoons for an hour and so on. Many don't take that advice. They don't want to take it, or they can't take it because of the blockage they're experiencing, right? So what do you think about this? Because on one hand, we have evidence that changing habits is essential, is fundamental, is a pillar in therapy. And another part is that when someone is suffering, it's already hard enough when you're doing well, changing habits, working out, eating well, all of that. We know that food is an emotional refuge. We know that when you're out of balance, exercise is that it can be something you suffer through, or let's say it's not something pleasant at first. It's also hard, right? So when you're suffering is when you least want to walk. It's when you cling the most to what you know, right? How does this work when someone's stuck like that?
Look, that's why you have to assess the patient, because I would never think of explaining to a completely depressed patient who can't get out of bed in that appointment the importance of physical exercise for their mental health, which is huge, because the only thing that's going to do is add more guilt, right? Because many patients who are having a hard time feel very misunderstood, because if I'm depressed and I can't move my body, I feel tremendous guilt because I'm not taking care of my child the way I'd like to. My house is a mess. I already feel like a bad parent, and now a book says I should run to reduce anxiety, which just makes me feel even more guilty. Analyze and understand the situation. If I'm totally stuck, seek another kind of help. And now, when I start to feel a little better and I'm no longer in that moment, that's when the challenge for doctors is to convey that importance. Look, something wonderful happens with exercise. I say that when you go to a specialist, it doesn't matter which one you go to. You go to the dermatologist, you go to the endocrinologist, you go to the orthopedist, you go to the ophthalmologist, you go to the psychiatrist, and all of them will tell you that it's essential for you to exercise. Everyone will say it's essential to sleep well. And our challenge as communicators and as doctors is to explain very clearly why it matters and what it's for to the patient, so that the patient leaves that appointment saying, wow, because I think we are very aware of the benefits of exercise on our physical health. But those of us who work in mental health, I think we haven't been able to convey or communicate to the public just how important it is for mental health. The other day, I went with a patient who has a neurodegenerative disease to see a neurologist, and the neurologist explained to us how important it was for the future of that neurodegenerative disease that the patient stayed active. We both left that appointment saying, wow, we really have to exercise no matter what. My relative changed their entire schedule, reorganized it because they understood that they had to dedicate 1 hour a day to walking, and that's a wonderful achievement. So that's where we have to try to give our best. Yes?
Also, there are specialties where, although it's beneficial in all of them, maybe the benefit isn't so obvious. I don't know, maybe in dermatology it's not so clear, but in mental health, in psychiatry, I mean, it's also an immediate relief. I mean, if you're having a bad day and you do a little bit of cardio or go do some strength training, it changes your mood immediately, right? So I think it's super clear in your specialty. And I think that once patients get into a routine, they don't stop, because a lot of people train because of anxiety. I mean, they exercise to relieve anxiety as their primary goal, not to lose fat, not to gain muscle, right? Just to relieve anxiety, right? I have several patients like that. So, well, I think the patients know it, but it's true that when you're at that point of being stuck, like you said, maybe it's more about making a personalized plan to say, okay, the patient is at point A, let's first take them to point B and then to point F.
That's right. We have meta-analyses that show that for mental health, it's about hitting key points. Exercising 3 times a week can have a more powerful anxiolytic and antidepressant effect than the best medications or the best psychologists, and it can improve your mood by up to 5 times. That's wonderful. I mean, when I move, I release a wonderful chemical soup of happiness and calm. I release BDNF, which is that fertilizer for our neurons that helps our brain regenerate. I release endorphins and endocannabinoids, which are responsible for that runner's high, for making me feel so good when I finish running. Then I release serotonin and dopamine. I mean, it's that Molotov cocktail of mental well-being that is really, really good for all of us.
Good. I mean, it's better than the most powerful psychiatric drug or therapist.
A meta-analysis suggests that, right? There's plenty of supporting evidence, but real clinical practice isn't that straightforward. But just so we understand the magnitude of how important it is to move and exercise.
You mentioned the depressed patient earlier. We recommend the chapter in your book to everyone, because everything we're going to talk about today in the episode is covered here. And there are also many more tools and very practical information here. You said it was called something like the anxiety train, which has a final station, which is depression. And there's a figure that really shocked me, which is that 50% of patients who suffer from anxiety end up depressed.
Of course, I always explain that anxiety is like getting on a train headed for depression, and you decide at which station you get off. In the end, if you keep ignoring that signal, that autopilot telling you to slow down, to change something, the only way your body has to protect itself is to say, if you're not going to change anything, if you're not going to stop, don't worry, I'll make you stop. It will essentially shut down the house's power and send you into such deep sadness that you won't even want to get out of bed or off the couch. And that's when many patients come to the office saying, hey, I just don't feel excited about anything anymore. I don't have energy for anything. I cry over anything. I feel irritable. These are warning signs that we need to recognize that I've pushed the engine too hard and it's about to break down.
1,000 questions came to mind since we weren't planning to discuss depression, but it inevitably came up. In that case, depression can also be seen as a defense or a symptom, right? Rather than as a depressive disorder. Right? I mean, it's like your body is screaming at you, you've gone too far, my friend, we've suffered for many years, and now it's your turn to stop because I'm forcing you to stop.
Of course, I can't keep running from the lion my whole life. I mean, 5 minutes of running to save my life is great and very welcome, but I can't keep up this frenzy because in the end, it's going to end up killing you. Anxiety attacks aren't dangerous. Even though anxiety makes you feel like you're dying or having a heart attack, you're not actually going to die then. But having stress over a long period of time, having anxiety for years, is terrible for your body. It triples your risk of a heart attack and doubles your risk of liver problems. It increases your risk of autoimmune disease by 36%. Living your whole life at 1,000 revolutions per minute doesn't come without a cost. And if you don't stop, your body will force you to stop. Ultimately, that defense mechanism you mentioned will kick in, sending sadness to drain your energy and force you to stop.
Because in the last episode, Alejandro, a neurologist we spoke with about strokes, said that we don't know the cause for 1 out of every 5 strokes. And I asked him, well, what do you think? Because 1 out of 5 is a lot. It's a really high percentage, right? And they don't find any infarction, nothing in the imaging tests. And he said that obviously there could be many hypotheses, but he had many close examples of patients who, before the stroke, had experienced anxiety, overwhelming anxiety, overwhelming stress, right? So, of course, it's like asking the body for much more than it can give for a long time, right?
That's where the problem comes in. You've defined it really well.
But look, I get the feeling that, I mean, there are many patients who know they have anxiety and try to do something about it, but then there's another percentage of patients who also suffer from anxiety. But either they don't know it or they hide it because, I don't know, maybe having anxiety isn't considered masculine, or they hide it because they don't want others to see them in a bad light, or they don't want their children or family to see them that way. Or maybe, I don't know, they're just not aware that they have this problem, right? And they carry it for years until they become depressed, and sometimes they don't even realize they're depressed. Why do you think it's so hard for people to become aware that they have a mental health problem like anxiety or depression? I don't know if I'm making myself clear, right?
Exactly. In the end, first of all, there are people who don't know how to recognize the symptoms. I say that anxiety is the illness with 1,000 faces. It can give you any symptom you can imagine. It can give you tachycardia, chest pressure, a feeling of dizziness like you're going to lose your balance. It can cause a terrible headache, horrible muscle pain. It can cause insomnia, it can cause depression, it can make your mind keep overthinking everything. It can cause trembling, dry mouth, it can cause atrial fibrillation. I have a case involving a businessman from Madrid. He was a friend of his son. Please, my father wants to have a coffee with you. He was still normalizing some tremendous levels of stress and anxiety, and he came in with atrial fibrillation. That's not something your mind is making up, because a lot of people ask me, so are those physical symptoms real, or is my mind making them up? No, they're 100% real. When you get a cold sore because you've been super stressed preparing that presentation for work and it shows up at the worst possible moment, that symptom is very clear. Your defenses are low because your cortisol is high, making your body scream. Well, this businessman came in with atrial fibrillation, which could be seen on the electrocardiogram as his heart was beating out of sync. And he had undergone a catheterization. He was on every antiarrhythmic medication possible. It wasn't until I told him, but you're all wound up, I said, let's meet at 7 in the evening for a coffee. He ordered a coffee with milk. He told me he couldn't sleep. I said, but how are you ordering a coffee with milk at 7? And he said, no, I'm already so wired that another coffee doesn't matter. He tells me, and I say, well, it does matter. It matters a lot, doesn't it? We eventually managed to control that anxiety, though it took time. In the end, his heart began beating steadily, and he no longer felt that intense discomfort during meals when his heart would skip a beat. We managed to control it. First, we don't recognize the symptoms, and many people also struggle to identify them. If there's anything good that the pandemic has brought, it's that it has made mental health much more visible and patients seek help sooner and they learn to better identify what's happening to them. And there's not as much taboo anymore. It's not so hard to say, hey, look, I'm feeling down. I don't know anyone who doesn't have their own personal baggage. No matter how good things may seem, everyone has their worries, difficulties, personal struggles, mental load. And in the end, there's nothing wrong with admitting it. If we want to get better, everything starts with recognizing that we are vulnerable and we all have our difficulties. And, admitting them, no matter how good life may seem. And I see that a lot on social media since I work with many content creators who apparently have the perfect life and everything. Everyone has their own baggage. And maybe there are people, teenagers, kids who would pay to live that life, which looks idyllic on display, but we all have our personal struggles.
That's very interesting. In fact, I read recently, I think it was last month, a review came out saying that content creators are a high-risk group for anxiety and depression. I mean, we have worse mental health than the general population, which doesn't surprise me at all because of the overexposure, comparison, and the hamster wheel we get into because of our work. Don't you think that the fact that many patients don't realize it, or don't identify those symptoms, or don't know how to recognize them also has a cultural origin because our society rewards that? I mean, it's like what happens with male depression, right? You know that depression in men shows up quite differently than in women. You know that better than I do. What happens is that sometimes society rewards those behaviors, right? Like hyper-competitiveness or sometimes aggressiveness or sometimes, well, many others, right? Workaholism, right? Don't you think that society also rewards anxious, hyperactive, or hyperproductive behavior, or having 4 meetings in a row in 1 hour?
There's a very famous book that just came out, The Burnout Society, by a wonderful philosopher that points this out. Well, that we've turned into our own tyrant bosses, that we demand more and more from ourselves. And in the end, we end up feeling apathetic, tired, and exhausted because we can't keep up that pace. And of course, it's rewarded. We live in a frantic society where everything depends on what you produce, not who you are, on external perception, not your own satisfaction. And in the end, I mean, we don't stop to think about what we want. We normalize it, we get into that hamster wheel. And how often do we have a dialogue with ourselves, a date with ourselves, to sit down and write, to journal and say, hey, what do I want in this life? I want a lot of professional success because maybe I've normalized being in this career, and where is this career going to take me? There's an exercise that I love, which is the funeral exercise. I tell many patients and many followers to imagine the moment of their funeral and their best friends, family members, children get up to give a speech, a talk, a presentation about what they thought of that person. And what would you like them to say? That's where I can really find out what my values are, what my virtues are, my life projects. Hey, I want them to say that he was a super successful person at work, that he achieved incredible success. I want them to say that he was a great father, a good friend, or a great husband. What do I want them to say about me? And knowing those values sometimes helps us calibrate that compass. And it leads our most beautiful project, which is our life, our professional success, to a good destination.
Yes, I get the feeling that more and more that knowledge about what you want, who you are, and where you're headed is being overshadowed by external things, right? It's like we live more and more for others because since we live in a constant digital showcase, of course, if people are always watching you, what you want is for that showcase to be as normal as possible, right? The most applauded, what gets the most likes, right? And in that attempt, you lose yourself because you can't please the world and yourself at the same time, right? They're two different things. So, well, later I want to ask you about a controversial topic. I'm sure it's controversial even within psychiatry. I'll let you think about it. But when we talk about therapies, I'll ask you if you've researched anything about the world of psychedelics as well in mental health, okay?
It's true that just as I've reported a lot about phytotherapy, natural tools about psychedelics, there is more and more recent evidence that they can play a role under very, very controlled settings. I haven't explored it because it also scares me a lot and because I see the downside, which sometimes isn't talked about on social media in a psychiatry shift. Of all psychedelic drugs, the harm, the consequences they can cause, I'm scared because I'm not informed, so I don't see myself as a voice. It makes me objective to give an opinion because every day in my professional practice, I see all the consequences of using psychedelics. Of all the people for whom it doesn't work and who end up developing schizophrenia, a psychotic disorder, in some cases irreversibly. I always say that, for example, with drugs, anyone who thinks nothing will happen to them from smoking a joint or taking a psychedelic, they should spend a shift with a psychiatrist and see 16-year-olds who smoked one joint and ended up thinking they're being chased or having a severe psychotic episode. But I know they have their role and there is more evidence. Just the other day, I was given an article showing that very specific profiles with a very specific pathology could benefit a lot. But I'm telling you, I still need to explore this area.
Great. I'd also like to understand a bit more about what thinking biases, what cognitive biases lead us to have more anxiety or make us more prone to suffering from anxiety, right? Because maybe, right, certain ways of thinking can make us more prone to suffering from anxiety.
Look, anxiety hates uncertainty. That is, anxiety loves to have everything under control, and that's an unrealistic ideal in the world we live in. The typical profile of a father or mother who wants their child to be okay, who wants to control who they go out with, who they meet, what time they get home, so that nothing unpredictable happens to them. I mean, I can't expect to feel comfortable and okay only when I think everything is under control, because that's never going to happen. And then it loves catastrophizing, which is that cognitive bias, meaning that I always put myself in the worst possible scenario. We are designed purely from an evolutionary standpoint to put ourselves in the worst case scenario. If a leaf suddenly moves in the jungle, I'll assume it's a lion, since that could save my life. But that negative cognitive bias often works against us. So, that catastrophic mind, the anxiety that puts you in the worst case scenario. I notice a little lump here, I'm sure it's cancer. This person didn't say hi to me, I'm sure they're mad at me. Today my boss looks serious, I'm sure it's because I did something wrong. He's going to fire me, and I'll end up under a bridge unable to pay the mortgage. That's what the mind does, and the anxious mind thrives on it. And then that constant rumination, that mind that doesn't stop overthinking everything, can be exhausting. So we have to identify those biases to analyze our thoughts and say, hey, is what my mind is telling me true? Is it objective? And many times I use the metaphor of that defense attorney, right? That not everything my mind tells me is true. In the end, it's like I have a chessboard. On that chessboard, there are white pieces and black pieces. I'm neither the white piece nor the black piece. I'm the chessboard. That is, I am not my thoughts. I have to distance myself from those thoughts. And when my mind says, you're a mess, I'm not a mess. I'm having the thought that I'm a mess, which is very different because I no longer take it as a truth I have to accept, but rather that it's just a thought. Like a gray cloud in the sky, I might think I'm a mess for not doing as well as I'd hoped in this podcast, but that's just a thought, not reality.
Of course, great. Yeah, yeah. I mean, maybe control doesn't help at all, right? With anxiety, having everything under control, wanting to control. And what does help is learning to let go of control, which isn't so easy sometimes, right? There are exercises that I send to patients in this regard, those who are hyper controlling. Everything has to go exactly like this. If it doesn't go like this,
Look, for that mind that doesn't stop, for those very controlling people, there's a tool that I love that I always talk about, which is scheduled worry time. For that mind that's constantly worrying you, like, hey, my son hasn't come home, he must have had an accident. I have to retrain my mind so it doesn't keep tormenting me 24 hours a day. I'm not going to make my mind stop worrying, but I can tell my mind when and how it should worry. So, for those people who are exhausted by their thoughts, I give them a technique that I really love, which is 5 minutes of scheduled worry. I'll spend 5 minutes a day whenever it works for me, either in the morning or at night. I always think it's a good time when I get home from work at 8 or 9, or whenever each person gets home, to have 5 minutes to worry and worry as much as I want. What if my son does badly at school? What if his teacher tells me he's a disaster? What if my boss fires me? What if my partner leaves me because I feel he's more distant? I mean, all those catastrophic scenarios your mind paints for you, I'm going to give them their space. Because if I fight those thoughts, in the end, they're just going to get stronger. And every time I find myself outside of those 5 minutes with a catastrophic thought, I say, hey, thanks, but not now. I mean, thanks for coming to warn me, but not now. Wait your turn. So suddenly I start realizing that those thoughts no longer come at me constantly, 24 hours a day. In the end, our mind is like a garden. In the garden, we have beautiful flowers and weeds, just like in any garden. If I spend my whole life fighting those weeds and don't pay attention to the beautiful flowers I have in my garden, in the end, those beautiful flowers will end up withering. And I will spend my whole life fighting those weeds. So my attention waters those thoughts. I can choose which thoughts I pay more attention to and which ones I pay less attention to.
very interesting. How do you think the era of Instagram and social media that we all live in is affecting anxiety?
It affects us negatively, but we shouldn't demonize it. It's just another tool. And I can use a tool to my benefit to get information about health, to learn a lot of things, or I can use it to do myself a lot of harm. And I see it a lot in teenagers and young people. The other day, I remember a patient, very young, who told me when I was seeing her. My parents let me use social media on the tablet when I was very young. And when I was with her a few months ago, I spent an hour in the consultation and I wasn't able to get her to tell me. You must respect the patient's timing and ensure they feel comfortable sharing during the consultation. She was already 14. She was so anxious that she wasn't able to talk about what had happened with that tablet and that content. We ruled it out. I asked if anyone had blackmailed her, harmed her, or made any comments. No. She said that, one way or another, she ended up receiving some kind of contact that caused her tremendous discomfort, which at that moment she didn't know how to handle, and she gradually came to see it as normal. Since the algorithm saw she consumed that content, it began showing her even more. She was never able to express this to anyone, not even her parents. Her parents told her they noticed she was more distant and that she wasn't telling them things, which made her feel guilty. So, we need to analyze what kind of mental diet and hygiene we're cultivating through the content we consume. Because if I'm anxious and I tend to catastrophize, social media will give me a lot of that kind of content. If I'm afraid of airplanes, every plane accident that happens in the world will be shown to me. If I have a family that's terribly afraid of sharks, they'll send me news about them. On the beach in Malaga, someone was bitten by a shark. A shark was found in the Maldives. Someone on their honeymoon was bitten by a shark and lost their legs. So you have to know how to use social media, like everything in life. And there are many studies that suggest the more time we spend on social media, the unhappier we can become. And look, I create content and I love it, but we have to think critically about how we're using social media.
Yes, and also for me, I mean, if we're only talking about anxiety, they're inherently negative, in my opinion, because it's also a matter of the amount of information the mind receives, right? I mean, before your parents would get up on a Saturday morning, read the newspaper, and maybe in an hour of reading, they would read, I don't know, 20 news stories. 5 were good, 15 were bad, but they didn't have that visual load either. Today, you go on TikTok or Instagram, and maybe look, your parents, if we stick with that example, and they like to watch the news, right? Or like my father who watches the news, and in an hour on Instagram, he could easily see, I don't know, about 120 news stories, and they also pop up with images too, right? A shark has bitten a boy in Alicante, just like what happened recently. And it has a visual impact, a much more emotional impact, right? Because normally what we see now are videos we don't read anymore, right? I think that gives the mind a lot of fuel for the fire, right? Yeah. A lot of material for anxiety to run wild.
We're not able to process it, we don't have time, it gives us a very limited view of the world. That's it.
So, very catastrophic, right? You go in there and say the world is crap, when in reality, the world is progressing in almost every indicator, even if it doesn't seem like it.
In the end, and we all know, and those of us who create content know that negative things, precisely because of that, work much better on social media. They sell much more. A negative newspaper headline sells much more. Negative news works much better. If I raise the alarm about rising oil and gas prices, you see one and say, oh my God, everything is going up. It's worse than yesterday, right? They'll point out what's not working, since that attracts more attention. Some TV channels now end their news with positive stories of the day. After 45 minutes, the positive one.
That too.
After 45 minutes of overwhelming me, now he's bringing news. Some researchers found a new molecule against cancer. Yes. So, just so you see how biased it is and to what extent it makes you decide if I lately I don't watch the news, and I've been much happier since I stopped watching it. And I'm not saying people shouldn't listen to them, but my energy and the thing is, I used to listen to the radio, watch it, and I'd wake up already angry saying, this is wrong, this is unfair, this shouldn't be like this, what a mess. And in the end, for my mental health, I've decided that I choose how and when to consume them, because thinking critically about whether it helps me or not, well, yes.
Absolutely, I don't consume them either. And what happens to me is that I ask everyone about social media, right? I ask everyone, a lot of speakers who come and talk about the topic. I mean, the argument that you have to use them properly or that they're just tools to be used well is totally true. But for me, it's like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. It's like telling someone addicted to food to enter an all-you-can-eat buffet with mostly ultra-processed foods and just one apple and expecting them to pick the apple. Exactly. I mean, they're such powerful tools that I know people with very high intelligence, with doctorates, very successful careers, and they're addicted to their phones. In conversations like this, they suddenly pull out their phone, stop talking, and start watching reels. This is happening more often. So for me, it's like, well, a digital addiction that we all carry in our pockets, and not falling into it, especially when you're feeling down, is very difficult, very complicated. I mean, if it's complicated for a functional adult, how much harder must it be for a 16-year-old boy or girl? Exactly. That's it.
That's the key. And that's what we parents have to think about. And I have my 3 very young children, and it terrifies me to think about when they grow up. is if they have the tools. When I'm giving a Ferrari to a child and expecting them to drive it, to handle it well, I can't just give them a tablet and phone and expect them to manage the information well, like the patient I mentioned, because they lack the necessary tools. So we have to accompany them and help them, not just say, here you go, here's a world that can take you anywhere, and that's it, from something wonderful for personal growth or something horrible. And the other day, I remember that in the conference, I always show the photo when I give talks. What an impactful image. When I only had my son, our son was born, and we were driving in the car. On the way to Cáceres, we stopped at a fast food restaurant since it was the only option. And I have the photo, which is really striking, of my son sitting in the high chair because I saw the bleak image. And right behind him, there was a table with 16 adults. They all had their heads in their phones and didn't say a word. I took a photo and always blur the faces, including my son's, when I show it. It's striking. For 45 minutes that we were there, they didn't exchange any words. Everyone was on their phones. And that's when I started to think, hey, this can't be healthy. This can't be normal. And I did some research because I said, look, Alejandro, maybe times are changing. You grew up building wooden tree houses and you think that's normal and wonderful, but maybe there's another way to connect, and why does it have to be wrong? And that's when I started to investigate, and I said to myself, this can't be normal. There's something inside me as a psychiatrist that tells me this isn't good. And I found a study that I love, which I always mention in the book and everywhere, showing what happens when we communicate with someone. They took a group of girls and put them through a very demanding test in that controlled study. And they were going to have to present in front of a jury, so they would feel very judged. And some of them could have contact with their parents before the test. Others could only talk on the phone, and others could only send a text message. So those who could be with them, of course, had their cortisol and oxytocin levels measured, both in urine and saliva. And we saw that the cortisol went down and the oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone, went up. Those who could talk on the phone, hear the voice, also produced more, but those who sent a text message, neither one went up nor the other went down. So sending text messages is not enough for me to connect with someone. My body doesn't experience that warmth. And that sense of calm is not the same when I make a video call with someone as when I send a text message. And young people are increasingly afraid to talk on the phone, which is what I mentioned in the book, and it's being called the mute society. There's also a study from Australia that I love, which says that about 60 or 70% of young people, of teenagers, report that receiving a phone call from their parents makes them anxious. They'd rather hang up and text, "Dad, Mom, what do you want?" than talk on the phone.
From their parents. I can't even imagine how it is with their friends.
With a friend or someone else, it's hard for me to talk. I think women have a huge advantage over men in that. I see my wife sending a 17-minute voice message to her friends and I say, that's amazing. What could you possibly talk about for 17 minutes? With my friends, I care for them and try to nurture our friendships because I know how important they are. Like plants, if not cared for, they wither. I try to talk on the phone, and for me, it's very hard to talk with any of my friends, no matter who it is, for more than 3 minutes on the phone. There has to have been a breakup or something really serious for it to be a call or a voice message.
I love the point because you see, what I notice in the end is that these different ways of communicating often don't integrate, they don't add up, but rather some replace the others, right? So, if we're replacing the forms of communication that generate the most oxytocin and bonding, which would be, in the most optimistic scenario, seeing and touching your friend, giving a hug, chatting, having coffee, or going out, whatever it is. At one end is face-to-face, person-to-person interaction, and at the other end is a WhatsApp message, right? That is, what happens is that it gives us the false sense and reassurance that we're in touch with each other by sending WhatsApp messages, when in reality that's not any kind of real contact. I mean, it doesn't create or strengthen any kind of bond, right? I guess it doesn't weaken it either, but it doesn't make it stronger.
It's better than nothing since you water it a little, but for mental health, it's not enough. Right. Or making a video call with a friend, it's easy for us, but finding the time is hard and feels difficult for everyone. You'd think it would be simple. We thought technology was going to connect us and bring us closer to what's important, but many times it's actually distanced us because, as you said, a form of communication that's not enough has replaced the others.
Well, for me, it's still a large-scale social experiment, isn't it? And I think a big part of those upward trends in anxiety, because we haven't really talked about epidemiology, but anxiety rates keep rising, right?
Anxiety is one of those conditions where each generation is more anxious than the previous one.
Wow. But you realize, Alejandro, that past generations, maybe not our parents, but at least our grandparents and earlier, had to go through much tougher things in the world than we have. Yes, we've lived through a pandemic, we've experienced things, right? But we have more and more anxiety in a more comfortable environment. I mean, for me, that's like,
That's what should make all of us think. But just imagine that grandfather or great grandfather, you take him, bring him here, and drop him off one day at 7 in the morning at the entrance of the subway. I mean, he'd freak out.
totally,
He'd be totally shocked, asking what's wrong with everyone and why they're all on their phones.
they don't talk to each other, they don't look at each other.
They don't talk. An elderly person has fallen, 20 people have walked by, and no one has helped because this society is sick. I mean, sometimes we've normalized very simple things, but they just can't be healthy.
Absolutely. Well, this could go on for a long time. I'm going to ask you what to do when you're in that rocking chair metaphor, right? About your thoughts, as you call it, when your mind starts to ruminate. Sometimes at night, I don't know why, maybe you can tell me. At night, it seems like your mind gets even more active. You can dwell on a problem endlessly without making progress or finding a solution, only worrying about it. Why does the brain keep repeating a pattern it knows doesn't work? How can you break out of it quickly? What would you do? When you start a loop at 3 a.m. and go to the bathroom, what happens to me is it starts up again when I come back, and sometimes my mind settles down, sometimes it doesn't. So, what should you do then?
Look, the mind can be trained, and the mind, like a small child, can be taken by the hand and taught how to work or how we want it to work so that the mind serves us and we are not slaves to our own mind.
Do you talk to your mind?
I mean, I tell it not now, and sometimes I tell it no, and I talk to it and say stop, of course. I say this when there's a thought that traps me, that obsesses me, that worries me, and keeps going around in my head. The other day, something silly, like always, just to show you that we all have our own baggage. There's something stupid, something silly, but for me, it came from a great friend. We have a good group. We're a good group of friends from Madrid, from many places. We get together and we're all different ages. We have a wonderful group of 25 amazing people and we get along great. It's true that life has put us in different stages. Some were younger, others are older. One moves to the Basque country in Spain, another hasn't come back to Cordoba, so you can't maintain the friendship as well. And there's one, which I totally understand, who didn't invite me to his wedding, and I think that's perfectly fine, but there's a part of me that feels really sad about it. Sometimes I start to obsess over those thoughts. I start again thinking, he didn't invite me to the wedding, what a shame, I'm not taking good enough care of the friendship. I should take care of my 3 kids, do more things, create content, call all my 27 friends 14 times a day, because you see, this is a clear sign that this area of your social life isn't how it should be. Sometimes I catch myself doing that, knowing it only makes me worry, keeps me distant, and stops me from enjoying moments like my daughter's adorable first smile, so I tell myself to stop. Not now, I've already analyzed and studied this. We understand life is like this and people grow up, that they'll have their own life circumstances, their own difficulties. They're perfectly free. I'm not going to hold any kind of grudge. I'm going to keep loving them the same as a friend, but I'm not going to stay stuck in this thought any longer. So I tell my mind, please stop, you're exhausting me. And when I allow myself not to get into that loop, that kind of thought shows up less and less each time. If I get caught up in it while driving, I can spend hours every day with the same thought. So our mind gets trained, and the rocking chair metaphor is that when I'm ruminating, I think I'm doing a tremendous amount of work. I think I'm making a lot of progress, but when I realize it, I end up exhausted and I haven't moved an inch, because worrying is one thing and taking action is another. If something has a problem, I can do everything in my power to try to improve it, but getting into that obsessive loop doesn't get me anywhere. And here I explain the wonderful metaphor of your circle of influence, which helps a lot of people. What depends on me and what doesn't depend on me. Of course, I've read about this. It's been thoroughly studied. A wonderful person taught me this, and I mention them often. When I finished my psychiatry residency, I went with my brother to Copan. We both wanted to be psychiatrists. We finished the MIR exam. You have 6 months, as you know, to think about what you're going to do, to enjoy yourself, to rest. And while we were preparing for the MIR, I told him, Nacho, we have to go to this place, which is supposed to be one of the best in the world, to explain how to meditate in a religion that has been studying human suffering. Where did you go? To Bhutan? To Copan, a Buddhist monastery in Copan, Nepal. We went to Everest Base Camp, and before that we stayed at the Buddhist monastery meditating for 3 weeks, doing nothing but meditating. Without cell phones, which were locked away in a little box. We woke up at 5:30 in the morning, meditating in peace, in beautiful gardens, enjoying ourselves. I loved it. And we met wonderful people because people from all over the world go there. It's amazing. And there's a person whose testimony changed the way I would handle my worries for the rest of my life. And I always tell her story everywhere. She was a lovely person, about 70 years old, from Colombia, who took on the motherly role for all of us there. I remember we ran out of shampoo. She didn't hear my brother and me talking. In a Buddhist monastery, the small shop sells many things, but not shampoo since everyone is shaved. So my brother and I had no shampoo. She heard and the next day brought us a small H&S bottle, which I'll never forget. Here, you can keep it. Those little details win your affection, right? At the end of the retreat, she shared her story and left everyone speechless. She told us that when we had a beer after 3 weeks in the monastery when we went to Kathmandu, she told us that she had been diagnosed with a very, very large brain aneurysm. They told her it could burst anytime and that surgery was too risky because of its location. So, what she could do, because she had very intense headaches, was wait to see if one day it would rupture or not. When she understood the doctor's message, she gathered her 3 children in the living room and explained it to them. She told them that she was going to go to this monastery, that it was a trip she had wanted to take her whole life, and that she was going to enjoy it. That all her life she had dedicated herself to taking care of her son, and that she had been very happy. But she felt that sometimes she had neglected herself, and that it was something she wanted to do before she died. They told her son, "Don't worry, we'll plan everything and go as a family." But she replied, "No, you don't understand. I'm going alone." And he says, "But how are you going to go by yourself? You're going to take a plane. At your age, we don't know if something might happen to you, if you'll come back, if you'll find yourself in the middle of a country like Nepal without help." She says, yes, it's something I have to do. And she told us, "Look, Alejandro, Nacho, I had 2 options, either spend the rest of my life worried and anxious, wondering when I would lose my speech, become paralyzed, or die, or enjoy the present moment, which is all I truly know I have since I'm here and feel perfectly fine." And I wasn't going to let that news ruin the time I had left to live, whether it was 5 minutes or 10 years. And when it comes to what depends on me, I picture 2 circles. One contains everything that depends on me, my actions, what I do, and a bigger outer one contains everything that doesn't. The weather doesn't depend on me. I can get really upset if it rains, but that's not up to me. What does depend on me is whether I take an umbrella or not when I go out this morning. So that helped us because right after, sometimes life puts mentors and lessons in front of you at just the right moments. And we're going to take what's considered the most dangerous flight in the world.
The one with that runway.
To reach the famous base camp, you must take a small plane flying between mountains. The runway is so short that a perfect landing is required. It crashes into the wall because there's not enough time, right? When you tried to get back on, you grabbed your suitcase and backpack, ran to the runway, they put you on the plane, and you said, no. A very, very strong gust has come, it can't take off, and you had to get off again. So you were worried that wouldn't happen to you in the air. And of course, my anxious mind started racing. It said, I'm going to leave my parents without their 2 children. I'm being reckless, selfish. How did I end up here? And I said, look, I have 2 options. Either I have a terrible time for an hour and have the worst trip of my life, maybe even have a panic attack on the plane, or I can learn from what this wonderful teacher has taught me, which is I'm going to enjoy the trip. I have videos with my brother on the plane, laughing and saying how scary but fun it is. And in the end, I enjoyed spectacular views of the entire Himalayas, and it was a trip that taught me how to manage those qualities. I mean, look, I can't spend all day tormenting myself over things that are outside my control.
So do you think that trip and those meditations at 5:30 in the morning have helped you as a psychiatrist?
A lot, a whole lot. I mean,
would you recommend it to someone entering mental health? I think that if I had been a psychiatrist, I would have done the same thing, gone to a Buddhist country, because I think that, I don't know what you think about Buddhism, but I believe it has a lot to teach us in the West when it comes to managing mental health.
A lot. After all, they've been studying human suffering, which is the first truth that Buddha spoke about, meaning, hey, we're all going to suffer. Suffering is inevitable. That's part of our lives, right? How do we handle suffering? That's where we have options. We went because my father, a psychiatrist, had discussed mindfulness and meditation with us. Since I was very young, when the first wave of mindfulness came to Spain from America, exactly, my father would say at meals, it's important to savor your food, be present at home, and when you wash the dishes. It didn't sound strange, but when your father says it, you don't really notice. And in the end, we tried to meditate a few times. He left us a very simple book that we loved, and I remember perfectly that mountain meditation, which I sometimes used when I was nervous, getting ready. First to become a doctor and then during medical school, but I couldn't manage to incorporate the habit of meditation. meditation into my daily life, and that's when I realized the power it has. And I always say that for anxiety, there are two habits that make a difference. My patient's overall prognosis improves with two simple habits anyone can adopt: exercise, which we've discussed, and meditation. They are the two holy grails for anxiety, and the most difficult of all, probably even more than exercise, is meditation, because it's very hard to keep up with it. First, people who meditate for the first time think, they say, this isn't for me. It's like if you've never run in your life and you say you're going to sign up for the Manhattan, New York Marathon, and you say, wow, I'm just great. I've heard running is great for your health. I'll get the best sneakers and sign up for a marathon. But after 5 minutes, you'll be exhausted and suddenly say, no, it's just that running isn't for me. No, 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 it's not that it's not for you. It's that you have to know how to do it. You have to start little by little. In the book, I offer meditations and a three-phase calmness technique, which I think is a great introduction to meditation. A guided meditation where you just have to put it on, listen to it, and let yourself go. And you don't have to do anything. Just lie down on the bed, have your time where no one bothers you, turn off your phone, and you don't have to expect any amazing results. Just simply see the great benefits that meditation has. And going there made me see firsthand what my life is like when I dial things down instead of going 1,000 miles an hour. As I said, I go calmly and peacefully, removing the noise, the only downside of being without a phone. I remember that when I opened it, I was overdrawn because I was there without a penny, and the bank was charging me like 70 euros a day for being overdrawn. And being without a phone ended up costing me a fortune. But I enjoyed it so much, I said, look, it cost me a lot to be 3 weeks without a phone. It was a bit crazy, but I enjoyed it so much that maybe it's the best money I've ever spent, the best investment of my life.
No, that's interesting. I mean, I think there really is a big barrier for people when it comes to meditating. But what you're saying is that an anxious person, if you tell them they have to meditate for 15 minutes, they won't be able to handle it, right? For me, if everyone just understood what you mentioned earlier, that you can at least talk to or observe your thoughts, I mean, just having that perceptual separation is already a lot, isn't it? Because most people live inside their heads. I mean, they're identified with their thoughts. No, they don't know. They can take a step back and say, no, no, no. That what's happening there in that mental space, I can observe it from the outside, right? I can ponder it, evaluate it. I can have an opinion about it. It's not me. It's not something. It's something I can, let's say, influence in some way. That's already the start of meditation, which is like that amplified 1,000 times. I'm not sure, but that alone would already be a lot.
It's a super important step. We call that cognitive diffusion. I am not my thoughts. Like I was telling you, in the end, it's like I'm watching a river where I drop leaves and those leaves flow, but I'm not any of the leaves. I'm just having those kinds of thoughts. What you're saying, that external observer, I was writing about it for my second book. I was working on that chapter. Yesterday, I was super stressed. I had just bathed my two kids who were fighting like a whirlwind. It was time to relax. I was really angry. They were laughing with each other, and I was there, and I said, I'm going to use that external observer technique. And it's as simple as taking a step back, describing what's happening from the outside in a completely cold or objective way. There's a father who's bathing his two children. The father is very angry. He's about to yell and say, that's it. Then he's going to feel terrible and have a huge sense of guilt. He won't solve the problem, and he feels a tremendous rage and anger in his chest. And that, made me take some training in self-control, in distancing myself from what I was feeling, just like when your boss is talking to you rudely. These are techniques we can use to put some distance between thought and action, which completely changes things. The other day, a very good friend of mine who just became a father for the first time sent me a voice message, and he said, Alejandro, I can't even stand myself. I'm irritable. I used to enjoy my job, my gym. Now I don't have time for anything. My son is 3 months old. I'm with him all day. I feel bad. I feel angry. Well, recognizing what's happening to us and putting it into words, and
The crisis of first-time parents, right? Sometimes it's also hard to face. Anyway, I find everything super interesting. Look, I also wanted to talk to you or ask you about the value as a psychiatrist that you give to doing nothing, because it's something I've been really interested in lately. You cite a statistic in the book, right? Something that also really impressed me was that 84% of people who watch a series do it with a second screen, with a mobile phone. We can't even watch a series for leisure without checking our phones or multitasking, right? Sometimes you have to force yourself when you can to do nothing.
It's super, super necessary, and it would be wonderful. Instead of adding and adding and adding, start subtracting to start seeing what I don't need. That's tremendous. That's how many people, in fact, all the podcasts, the series on the platforms are seeing that they have to reduce the length of their episodes. Because people can't handle 45 minutes focusing their attention on one episode and they have to last 20 minutes. Wow. And that's tremendous. People also, the other day, another friend told me, Alejandro, I was watching a soccer match, answering emails, and at the same time watching TikTok. And I remember I read your book and I said, but this is crazy. There are times when I do it too. There are times when I'm watching a show and I'm on my phone and I say, but this is crazy. I can't be present in the here and now, enjoying, savoring this show, and I have to add more and more to my brain. So, doing less many times, knowing how to stop, having moments alone with ourselves to disconnect, to go for a walk, to go into the woods. Another super important technique, which we know is really effective. And effective are the famous forest baths, which, in Japan, they were studied in the 1980s. Which has a high suicide rate and severe stress, with people dying at work after going 4 days without sleep. Well, it was found that something as simple as going for a walk in the forest, in nature, would lower your cortisol levels and your blood pressure in an incredible way. And the thing is, nature, forests release phytoncides, which are compounds that we know increase your natural defenses. There is a tremendous correlation in many meta-analyses that show it increases your natural killer cells. I mean that. Connecting with nature, being present in the moment, going for a walk while listening to the sound of birds, smelling what nature smells like, wet earth, often gives us a very important sense of well-being.
For me, the problem comes back to that. In the end, I think a lot of people are listening to us and saying, sure, those are luxuries. Where am I going to go to a forest on a Tuesday afternoon? Or how am I supposed to meditate if I wake up and I'm already running around? I think that in the end, we live in a society that makes everything related to taking care of mental health very difficult. It makes it really hard to see our friends, to have time to relax and enjoy ourselves, and sometimes it even makes it hard to exercise. And in the end, structurally, it's a society that makes our minds sick, we can put it that way, right? And sometimes I say, look, maybe the greatest luxury you can afford in life. Sometimes a guy who's 18, 19, or 20 asks me or asks for advice, and I tell him the greatest luxury you can give yourself is a lifestyle, a job, and a way of living that allows you to take care of yourself, right? In the long run, right? Maybe instead of earning 100, you earn 60, but it allows you to take care of yourself. I don't know what you think about that.
Absolutely. I mean, the situation is what it is, and it's very difficult to ask someone who's struggling to meditate or go out. But we also have a certain margin for action. We have to be very critical of our lifestyle, but we also have to take some responsibility. I'd be embarrassed to show you how many hours I spend on my phone. I'm being critical because when I saw the number the other day, it was honestly embarrassing. It's true that I also work with it, but even so, there's still some room for change, and yes, we can change. For example, in a beautiful city like Malaga, it's enough to have something handy so you don't use it. We appreciate Malaga's sea more now that we're in Cordoba than when we lived nearby, because when it's close, you keep postponing visits and never actually go to the beach. And you go to the beach and it's just a stone's throw away, or on weekends you go out to the forest, but we end up going somewhere else and we don't connect with nature. We know how important it is for your mental health to connect, to be able to see nature from where you work. It's closely related to mental well-being rates. There's some room to maneuver, but it's about priorities. And if we convey the importance, the why, and the purpose of these things from here, then many more people will be able to understand that it's not just a whim. It's not that I just feel like going for a walk, but I understand how important it is for me. And since I understand how important sports are for me, I make it a priority.
That's the first point. For me, the first point is to understand that all these things are therapies. In this case, since we're talking about mental health, they are therapies. And therapy isn't just going to a psychologist or taking the medication you have. It's all of that, right? So when people stop prioritizing other things and start prioritizing their care and their therapy, they'll understand that they're on the same level. Or sometimes they think these therapies are second rate. No, they're first rate. I mean, that's what the professionals are telling you. Yes. Ultimately, using a mobile phone for 4 hours is a lot, and as content creators, we likely use it even more each day. 4 hours times 7 days a week, that's 28 hours. What I think is that those 28 hours 3 decades ago were used for all this, for friends, for being at the park. I remember that I used to go out to the park in the afternoon to play, like, Mom, I'm going to the park to play. I mean, nothing else. I used to come back at 8 in the evening after 4 hours running around the park. Now I spend that time in front of a screen instead. We've swapped one thing for another, and that brings consequences, right? There's not much more, what's it called, Alejandro? What do you psychiatrists call that state when you're so anxious and so stressed, right? It's like your circuits just shut down and you stop noticing anything. Suddenly you're so overwhelmed mentally that you distance yourself from everything that's happening.
Those are dissociative phenomena that we call depersonalization and derealization, which many people experience as their surroundings not feeling real. It felt unreal, like watching a movie as if my body wasn't mine. A sense of strangeness can be very annoying, and people may worry they're going crazy, but that's not true. It's just that your body feels so much discomfort that one way to protect itself is to shut down, to hit the standby button in order to handle such overwhelming discomfort. So, is it another symptom of extreme anxiety? That's when we need to do something because our body is warning us that it can't handle such a heavy burden.
Speaking of warnings, you also mention in the book that you talk about how at one point you broke down during a session, right? And that you ignored it for a long time. Signs your body was giving you that you were anxious, right? And that people shouldn't ignore. What are those signs that generally go unnoticed? Because when you think of anxiety, you think of rapid heartbeat, headache, tremors, catastrophic thoughts. There's no rumination, but there must be more signs.
Yes, I always talk about it online too, and I mention it in the book that no one is exempt. No matter how many tools we have, no one is free from experiencing anxiety. And I start the book like that, telling how one day after taking my kids, well, I hadn't slept at all, I took my kids to preschool. Then I began my appointments, had a second coffee because I couldn't take it anymore, and noticed I wasn't performing cognitively as well as I'd like. And at some point during the appointment, I realized that I was over empathizing with the patient. What the patient told me affected me so deeply that I struggled not to break down in tears from sadness over their suffering, and I realized something wasn't right. Then I arrived in a frenzy, picked up the kids, I got home, and that annoying eyelid twitch started, and I told my wife, I think it's happening. I got home, and that annoying eyelid twitch started. I told my wife I wasn't okay, and she said Alejandro knows what to do. This isn't the first time, so we'll make some changes. And I had stopped doing sports. I had gone many months without any physical exercise because precisely when you're most overwhelmed, you start neglecting those small habits that are fundamental. So I had created the perfect storm that had brought me to a point that I was able to recognize. Thank God I stopped in time, or I could have ended up late and blocked. Among the warning symptoms you mentioned are apathy, loss of drive, irritability, and anhedonia, the AAA. In other words, those are already signs that your body is saying enough. We're entering the territory of sadness. And when I don't enjoy the things I used to enjoy, that's something every family member and patient should learn to recognize. I mean, I don't read anymore because I don't enjoy it. I'm with my son and I'm irritable. I don't go running because I used to enjoy it and now I don't go out on the bike. Those are symptoms that something needs to change.
Or is that point already, let's say, the turning point where we're moving from anxiety sometimes to the more depressive side, right? Not enjoying things, preferring to stay at home, or that and don't you think that anxious patients also become more and more fearful? That's the colloquial term, but well, they expose themselves less and less to things that generate uncertainty. I mean, what I see is that a lot of people start to narrow their range of activities, right? If before they used to meet up with 10 friends, then they meet with 6, then with 4. If before they had 3 hobbies, then they have 2, then 1. If before they like going to the movies, now they don't. And little by little, they stop doing things, right? Until the default plan is just to stay at home, right? And sometimes going to eat at the same places or doing the same things is a common pattern, a very common one.
Keep in mind that anxiety is like having a Trojan horse inside your own mind. The enemy is inside your head and knows exactly which buttons to press to make you so afraid that you end up falling into the trap of anxiety. And there's a chapter that mentions avoidance. In the end, if one day I'm driving, I'm super stressed at work, I'm going at a really fast pace, and suddenly I get dizzy while driving the car. I have an anxiety attack, a panic attack. There's this thought in my head that tells me, Alejandro, don't drive. What if you have an accident? It's going to scare you a lot. Look, what could have happened is going to make me imagine that catastrophic scenario. And there's a tendency that's going to beg me, please, not to drive again. But if I avoid that situation, if I give in to the anxiety, even though I know it's not likely, even if I reason it out and say, well, I don't really think I'm exaggerating here, in the end, that anxiety wins because that's what anxiety wants when it's really out of control. It wants you at home, locked up in a safe environment, within four walls, not exposing yourself to risks, to preserve yourself so you can keep reproducing and passing on your genes. That's when we lose the battle, which is why I always emphasize gradual exposures, like I explain in the book's chapter. A child who goes through a very traumatic event, like when a classmate gets hurt playing soccer, becomes afraid that it might happen to him. He doesn't want to go to school. We worked little by little, going to the school gate with his mother, then coming back, then going in for 5 minutes, then 10, and then without his mother. It's a very typical process. If someone has a panic attack in a mall or theater, they may avoid returning fearing another attack, but avoiding the mall only increases that anxiety. So, knowing that I can't do it on my own like that, most of the time, in the vast majority of cases, it's best to work with professionals because it's really hard for me to go through such horrible suffering since I experience that fear as something real. So I go and ask for help to be able to manage it.
Of course, you've mentioned panic attacks. Maybe those who suffer from them know what they are, but others don't. What is a panic attack and how does it manifest? How can you recognize it?
A panic attack, I call it a living death because it's so hard, so unpleasant, and you think you're having a heart attack, you think you're going to faint. You sweat, you have such a strong feeling of discomfort. It usually lasts an average of up to 10 minutes, but it's that sensation that your body is about to explode, and in the end, you feel like you can't breathe. I have a rapid heartbeat, I have all of it, profuse sweating. I think I'm going to lose my mind, I think I'm going to have an anxiety attack. Many people visit the ER thinking they're having a heart attack, but after an EKG shows nothing wrong, doctors say it's anxiety. They give you the well-known pill under your tongue, and the symptoms quickly disappear. But I've had such a hard time with it that I get really scared that it might happen again. So I try to do everything possible to avoid situations that could trigger that panic attack. I was at the gym, I started to feel my heart racing, I got nervous, and that triggered the panic attack. Now I don't go to the gym anymore. Is that a mistake? That's exactly what you shouldn't do.
All right, okay, great. Now I also want to bring up another topic which I think is not well known and quite important. You mentioned the case of a patient, Carlos, who used to break doors and was furious and expressed his problems with anger, with aggression, and all that. It's common that in men, just like depression, fear and anxiety are expressed differently and are masked by other behaviors.
Yes, and in the end, that has a lot to do with the sociocultural level, the role that has been given to him. That whole thing about men don't cry, men are always strong, they have to handle everything, they have to provide for the family. And that pattern, unconsciously, many people have it very internalized even today, right? So when you're upset because you have financial worries, you can't take it anymore, your boss is tough on you, you have 2 kids, you just can't handle anymore. And suddenly you start to see that you can't keep up, but you can't allow yourself to break down because you've never been allowed to. Has anyone ever told you, hey, you can get stuck too, you're human? Well, you start to feel an internal discomfort that often ends up exploding in fits of anger, and I see it a lot in consultations, responses that later make you feel bad. You lose your temper with your friend when he disagrees cause a scene, and then ask, hey man, what's wrong with you? If you, just because we don't agree with you, you can't make a scene and slam your hand on the table, ruining our evening and breaking doors at home. Domestic violence, which is a tragedy, alcohol consumption that often leads to more domestic violence, it's a drama in that inability to manage emotions, which is true that it exists. Women, I think they are much more intelligent. They have a greater ability to look inside themselves to analyze what is happening to them. And I see many men who are changing, and you shouldn't generalize because whenever you generalize, you make a mistake. But there is a pattern that repeats itself.
In fact, a question comes to mind. I recently made a video about depression in men, right? And well, even though I'm not a psychiatrist, I was analyzing all the recent evidence, about that pattern. There was a study that really caught my attention. It said something like if we always took into account the externalizing symptoms, all those classically masculine behaviors, in the diagnosis of depression, there wouldn't be so much disparity in the diagnosis because the same thing happens with depression. 8 out of 10, I think, or 9 out of 10 are women. But if we took these symptoms into account, it would really even out. I mean, men don't get depressed less, we just get depressed differently in another way. The same thing happens with anxiety because the numbers are similar. I mean, for me, like I was telling you at the beginning of camera, having a brain that's essentially the same except for hormonal differences with the same software, to me, it doesn't make sense that 80% of people with anxiety are women. I mean, could it be that men don't allow ourselves to have anxiety, or rather, we don't allow ourselves to express it to the world, right? We don't allow ourselves to be seen as anxious, to be seen losing control, to be seen, losing control, to be seen, well, out of it or defeated or asking for help. That's why we prefer the behaviors you mentioned.
It's an interesting phenomenon to analyze, and while we lack a simple explanation, it should make us all reflect, right? I think that, like many things in mental health, it's multifactorial. And as you mentioned, we should, on one hand, look at why men don't go to therapy as much or why it's so hard for them to ask for help and actually go to therapy, right? Many times it's the family members who have to bring him in by force because he doesn't allow himself to feel bad. And then why is there that rate of anxiety? Is it twice as common in women as in men? That should make society reconsider things. I think it's difficult, and it's true that there's a small hormonal component, but I also think that the double or even triple work shift is still a reality because many times women still carry the burden at home. For the most part, many women not only have joined the workforce, but they also carry all that work burden plus the family responsibilities when they get home. And in many cases, that's when anxiety and depression spike in women. Around the age of 50, when that triple work shift is added, which is taking care of parents when they start to become dependent. And unfortunately, many times that responsibility still falls on women, right? So the mental load, which often hasn't been recognized, right? Just thinking about what to cook today, what needs to be done today, that alone is exhausting. And in the end, other things get recognized instead for a long time, but not the wonderful part. I always say the person running the household is most important. When it's me, it's me. When it's my wife, it's her, because it's exhausting. When I'm with my kids, running the household, when I'm on paternity leave, in the end, I don't interact with adults because I'm with my child. I'm constantly thinking about whether they have a presentation the next day or not, if they have to go dressed as a farmer or not, if we're going to cook today, if they ate chicken and protein at school. So tonight, what am I going to make them for dinner? There's an invisible, exhausting job there that often hasn't been appreciated. Then we ask the person who carries all that weight on their shoulders why they're falling apart. When I dedicate myself to taking care of everyone else but don't leave any space for self care, it's normal that sooner or later I end up breaking down. I always explain that the heart first sends the most oxygenated and highest quality blood through the coronary arteries so that it can then send it out to the rest of the body. With self care, it has to be the same for the rest of the body. Taking care of myself is not an act of selfishness. Setting aside 15 minutes for a relaxing massage, taking a calm bath, reading, or stepping away for a bit. Taking care of myself helps others because when I'm well, others benefit too.
Absolutely, yes, yes. Sometimes even many mothers and many women feel guilty about it, right? That moment of self-care, no, how am I going to work out? No, how am I going to get a massage? No, how am I going to go for a walk? How am I going to meet up with my friend with everything I have to do? But well, yes, absolutely. There are social variables that are very clear, I think, and that, let's say, create differences, right? In both genders, for better and for worse for each gender. Getting a bit into the solutions, there's a lot to talk about, but I just want a comment on the role of diet in anxiety, right? Because obviously in recent years, a lot of studies and systematic reviews have come out about the role of ultra-processed foods in mental health, and it's clear that there's an association between more ultra-processed foods and higher rates of depression and anxiety. There is an association there, it already exists, but now, is there causality? Are there mechanisms that could link more anxiety if we eat more ultra-processed foods?
Look, I don't know. I wouldn't dare to point to those mechanisms as causality, but we do have a lot of evidence, as you said, that points in that direction. The other day, I was reviewing the SMILE study, which is one of the most important ones out there, not with an agreement from the ENE. It was huge. It was 535,000 patients. I don't remember. I might be wrong, but it was huge. That analyzed how a Mediterranean diet, when used in very depressed patients who were on their medication, and to one group, they added the Mediterranean diet, rich in legumes, olive oil, polyphenols, vegetables, fruit. It produced a 3 times greater remission of those depressive symptoms compared to those who were not given that Mediterranean diet. This is tremendous. I mean, obviously, just how much our mental well being starts with what's on our plate. I mean, it's multifactorial like everything in mental health, but we have to give importance to what we eat. We know that ultra-processed sugar spikes our levels. Anxiety spikes to a harmful level in our brain. The gut-brain axis is one. Having good microbiota that produces butyrate, which is extremely important for our brain and our well-being, is fundamental. And hey, It all starts with not taking things to extremes, because I think we need to have common sense in everything, including what we eat. And I think it's essential to take care of 90% of what I eat on a daily basis. It's about eating healthy, going to the supermarket, and being careful about what I put on my plate. But you also have to enjoy a good burger or a nice treat, because that's also mental health and that's happiness. Recently, I went to a restaurant chain and they told me about someone who used to be intolerant to cow's milk protein, but after reintroducing milk, they could finally have their first burger. We took them to our favorite burger restaurant, a big chain, and I was amazed at the amount of fat. While I was ordering, I saw the amount of fat coming off the grill, the number of burgers being made. You look at it and think, this is a mess, this can't be healthy. But the way I enjoyed that burger, having it once in a while, is wonderful. Now in my daily life, I try to take good care of myself, and that's the key.
Yeah, same with exercise, same with meditation. For me, they're all like tools that make the nervous system more resilient in the face of anxiety, right? I mean, can you have anxiety if you eat perfectly? Yes, but it's harder. Can you have anxiety if you exercise? Yes, but it's harder. So in the end, I think what people need to do is develop their own coping tools for anxiety.
I always say in the book that anxiety is like a scale. Everything that stresses me is on the left, and everything that relaxes me is on the right. Here I have my life context, my mortgage, my boss, my kids, many things, my personality, my perfectionism, childhood patterns I've acquired, and here I have everything that relaxes me. And we know that the most important factors are social connection, good rest, physical exercise, a good diet, and meditation. Some people find ways to balance themselves. I can work to remove things, delegate, and change perfectionism or mental rumination, but some things in my life can't be changed. I can't quit my job right now because of my mortgage, even though I'd love to escape the stress from my boss. Sometimes life just is what it is, but I can see what I can add here, and that's where everything you mentioned comes in. That diet, that exercise, seeing how I can counterbalance my scale so it doesn't get to the point where it becomes so unbalanced that I cross that red line you mentioned. The one we mentioned where I get blocked and depressed. So we need to find balance, and I analyze my progress daily. Hey, coming on this podcast has been a big logistical challenge for me. I can manage, but for a long time, it was easy to set the date. What did I have to say? No, look, I love it. I'm excited about the book and putting a lot of care into it. It's doing well and I'd love to go, but sometimes I just can't. Now that my life is better, I said I can finally afford the luxury of coming.
Of course, that's great. And that reflection should be daily, because I get the feeling that a lot of people really tip the balance until they can't take it anymore. And suddenly they say, no, I have to book a 2 or 3 day getaway to recover, right? Yeah, that getaway is cool and it will probably help you a lot. But I think if every day we included, 25 minutes of exercise, taking a little care with what you eat, some contact, or taking care of a friend, taking care of your partner or your kids, whoever it is, your father, your mother, the same. So in the end, what we do is live more in balance, more in harmony, and we don't reach the breaking point where we have to fix things, right? Because what I do see is that a lot of people have to reach the breaking point to say, I'm going to change what I'm doing in my life. And that's sad because it's tough. I mean, breaking hurts a lot.
It happens a lot. In the end, it's human nature and it happens to many of us. There comes a moment when the pain of staying as I am is so intense that I prefer to change. And it's true that in everything, the pain of being in such bad physical shape, feeling so rejected, makes me want to get fit. The pain of staying anxious limits me so much that I want to change. As I say at the beginning of the book, like I mentioned before, there came a moment when I was reaching that point, meaning I was about to shut down, I was going to rebalance myself, and I managed to balance things again. But if we manage to prevent it, like you said, if we incorporate those habits, then I can be very far from reaching that point.
There's a word that I think is key in working against anxiety or in prevention, and I'm sure you've worked on it a lot, especially since you have a background and you like Buddhism, right? It's acceptance. I mean, how acceptance helps us with anxiety.
It's extremely important. The word acceptance is probably one of the most important things we have, both in therapy and in everything. Whenever you feel pain, the first step is to accept it. If I break up with my partner, the first thing we try to address with any patient is to accept it. Grief, a loss, any suffering, accepting that there are things I cannot change. And with anxiety, it's important to accept that anxiety can be there. I mean, I don't have to live without anxiety, because thinking I need to be free of anxiety to feel okay is a huge trap many people fall into. Anxiety can be there, but I can decide how I face my life. I use the metaphor of the anxiety FM radio. That is, anxiety is going to be there drilling into me. Everything it can do. Don't drive the car in case you crash. Don't let your child go out in case something happens to him. But I can decide to turn down the volume on that radio, right? Maybe I'll never set it to 0, but I can leave it at 3 or 4 and accept that it's there. Acknowledge anxiety and thank it for trying to protect you and trying to make you worry, but decide to stop paying attention to it. So accepting that it's an emotion that can be with us and that it won't disappear completely, but that I have a certain margin of control over whether I pay attention to it or not is very liberating. If I tell you not to think about a pink elephant and you keep trying not to, that pink elephant ends up being very present, which is a common example. If I try, I don't want to have anxiety, and I fight anxiety, the more I exhaust myself trying to push it away, the more present it becomes.
I mean, accepting, and sometimes in that acceptance, you realize that your mind calms down, or you realize that everything bad that could happen really isn't that serious, right? It's like, well, this is also very much from Stoic meditation, from, well, putting yourself in the worst case scenario, right? The worst case scenario. No? What could happen? What would be the worst? Okay, if you can accept the worst, then you'll probably be fine, right?
You use up your worry there, of course.
All right, in terms of immediate things you can do, which you teach a lot on your Instagram account, what things are there? Change your breathing. Something about the somatic hug. Tell us what.
Look, never this thing we're talking about, how we all live anxiously, but no one has ever taught us how we should breathe when we need it most. Not in school, not anywhere. We shouldn't blame others or expect everything to be handed to us, since we can often learn ourselves. Mental health is a trendy topic, but no one teaches us how to relax, even though simple, powerful tools can help. And probably one of the techniques with the most evidence, the one most therapists use worldwide, is diaphragmatic breathing, which I want everyone who watches to know about. I want everyone listening to this podcast to consider this a gift for making it this far. When you get nervous, how can you breathe to relax quickly and effectively? We have a lot of scientific evidence that talks about its benefits and results. It's called diaphragmatic breathing, and it consists of imagining that we have a balloon in our belly, okay? To start learning how to use it, I want people to put their hand on their chest and on their belly. And now we're going to inhale through the nose in 1, 2, 3, and 4, inflating the belly forward. Hold it in 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now I'll exhale through my mouth, drawing my belly inward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The idea is to breathe with the belly without breathing with the chest, so that when I inhale, the hand moves forward, and when I exhale, the hand moves back. When we get nervous, we all tend to breathe shallowly with our chest, when we should do the opposite. To activate that parasympathetic nervous system and calm ourselves, when I am very nervous, inspiro. I inhale and exhale with an exhale longer than the inhale. This tool is super simple. I guarantee you that if, when you are very nervous before a presentation or an important meeting, you do 3 or 4 diaphragmatic breaths, and if you combine it with a visualization of your safe place, that is, imagine that place from your childhood where you felt calm. It could be a room, it could be the place where you spend your summers, that beach you used to go to as a child, your safe place. It's super effective and I use it a lot. So, diaphragmatic breathing, when I'm nervous, 3 or 4 times before that key moment, is going to help calm me down significantly.
And a reel of yours that went really viral, was it the one about the somatic hug?
The somatic hug is another breathing technique that consists of taking your right hand, placing it under your left armpit, and your left hand, and placing it on top of your shoulder. And we're going to do that breathing pattern for 1, 2, 3, and 4. I hold for 1, 2, and 3, and then I exhale again for 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's very effective because it's a way to boost oxytocin to release that bonding hormone. It's a universal gesture of self-compassion that my brain automatically interprets as directed toward myself. I mean, hey, everything is okay, it's all right, you don't have to handle everything, I take care of you, I give you a lot of love, and with that breathing technique, it's super effective. Another technique I love is realizing how good it feels to hug yourself, yet how rarely we do it.
I hadn't thought that I could hug myself. That's great. That's a good one. Good point. There's another technique too, since we're talking about solutions, called the downward arrow. How does it go? Protocol, no, the downward arrow technique, right?
Of course, it's about questioning your thoughts. I have a catastrophic thought like saying, today my boss was serious, right? He was serious, and what happens? Why? Just because he's serious. I'm going to put that ruminative, obsessive thought on trial and see where it leads me. Maybe he's mad at me. What happens if he's mad at me? Well, maybe he won't give me that promotion. And what happens if he doesn't give me that promotion? I'll take that worry and investigate thoroughly to see where it leads. Maybe I can't buy that car, which makes me feel like I'm failing. And what if I can't buy the car I'm excited about? Maybe I won't feel as happy. Do I really need it to be happy? Hey, let's question it. Let's put those thoughts on trial to see if, with that downward arrow, that catastrophic thought is really true or if it's a bit exaggerated.
Okay, so it's a matter of analyzing the thought and seeing where it leads, right? Great. All right, Alejandro, let's wrap up. I don't know if you want to say something to the viewers who are watching us, whether they have an anxiety problem or not, or if they have a family member or friend who suffers from it. What advice would you give as a psychiatrist and content creator?
Everyone will face stress or anxiety at some point, but we can all learn simple techniques that greatly improve our well-being. No one teaches us these things. They seem to be hidden, but they can make a real difference in how I handle my day-to-day life and whether I enjoy the here and now. So it's our responsibility to incorporate them and put them into practice. So, life is wonderful when we get off that frantic train we've normalized living on, and that causes us so much suffering. I see it in my consultations, on social media, and in my daily life. That would be the message. Hey, of course, things can change, but we have to learn how.
Great. Well, first of all, congratulations on the quality of the episode. I loved it. It was very, very practical. And thank you for managing everything. I know you have 3 small children and a very tight schedule. You made the effort to come here to record and help, well, the thousands and thousands of people who are going to watch us, right? So truly and sincerely, thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm honored to be here.
And that you keep on, spreading the word in this way, since 500,000 followers are already benefiting from your advice. You have to keep going because it's really needed. You know that in the end, mental health is really the big pandemic we have on our hands.
Well, yes, thank you for being here and for giving us another platform so people can understand how we can feel a little better in our daily lives.
Great. So guys, Dr. Alejandro Martinez Rico's Ansiedad, Déjame en Paz is now available in all bookstores. I hope this episode has been helpful and practical for you. If you see that there is a family member, someone you know, a patient, or anyone who is having a hard time with anxiety, please share this episode with them because it will do them a lot of good. See you next time. Big hug. Let's keep empowering ourselves.